Stell dir vor, du liebst jemanden, aber diese Liebe kann für dich 5 Jahre Arbeitslager bedeuten. Regisseur Peeter Rebane erzählt in seinem neuen Film Firebird von homosexueller Liebe zu Sowjetzeiten. Firebird erzählt die Geschichte von Sergei und Roman. Sergei ist Soldat und Roman sein vorgesetzter Leutnant. Im Film befinden wir uns in den 1970ern auf einem Luftwaffenstützpunkt. Sergei und Roman verlieben sich ineinander, aber ihre Liebe ist strafbar und somit ist ihr Schicksal besiegelt. In dem Film geht es jedoch nicht primär um Heimlichkeiten und Strafen, sondern vielmehr um den Wunsch, zusammen zu sein und man selbst sein zu können. Der Film basiert auf einer wahren Geschichte. Er ist jedoch nicht nur ein Zeitdokument, sondern macht auch auf die diskriminierenden Anfeindungen und Benachteiligungen aufmerksam, denen homosexuelle Menschen heute noch ausgesetzt sind. Ich habe mich mit Regisseur Peeter Rebane und Schauspieler sowie Co-Drehbuchautor Tom unterhalten. Zuallererst wollte ich von Peter wissen, wie es denn dazu kam, dass er einen Film gedreht hat. Bisher war er doch eher für die Produktion von Musikvideos bekannt.
It's been kind of a dream for a long time, and I started out actually as a producer of music events and film events, and then realized that my dream had always been to direct, so went back to film school and then made music videos and was looking really for this story that would resonate. And it was actually thanks to Berlinale about 10 years ago that a friend of mine, who is the founder of the Black Nights Film Festival in Estonia, Tina, she was approached by a Russian journalist at the Berlinale with the original manuscript. And so she knew that I was looking for a story, brought it to me in Estonia. And I read it in my broken Russian over a weekend, literally cried and just felt that I have to turn this into a film. So that's how it started.
Ihm wurde klar, dass er schon immer davon geträumt hat, auch einen Langspielfilm zu machen. Und auf der Berlinale hat ihn dann endlich das richtige Manuskript gefunden. Er hat es in seinem gebrochenen Russisch gelesen, geweint und wusste sofort, das ist der Film, den er machen will. Und was hat Tom an der Geschichte so fasziniert?
Well, it was curious because I was in Los Angeles having just filmed Kingsman: The Secret Service, and I was taking a lot of meetings and you know, kind of seeing things from the other side of the water. And I was introduced to a film financer and a producer who had actually read the first draft that Peter had written of Firebird, which at the time actually was called Roman. And I basically thought that like this story was something which I hadn't seen before, but it was of a type of relationship and the type of relationship that I was interested in writing about in a very interesting context. So I have grown up loving and watching James Bond, Jason Bourne, and like all kinds of like thriller-based stories, and they've been very influential into the type of movies that I really enjoy to make and to be in. Like Kingsman: The Secret Service again for me was like wow as a first opportunity, and so there was this really amazing background of a Soviet Air Force base, and then a very curious type of a relationship which came about, which I was astonished that was true, and it was so moving in the kind of inevitability that they had to be together and fighting to be together. I was like going, okay, well, this is something like the kind of thriller-based story that I'm kind of interested to tell, but also from a much more kind of like significant point of view, from like a relationship.
Tom fand es toll, dass er die Story noch nie zuvor gesehen hat und dass der Film alle Arten von Beziehungen enthält, über die er gerne schreibt. Beziehungen, die er in dieser Konstellation und in diesem Kontext noch nie gesehen hat. Als Tom aufwuchs, haben ihn Filme wie James Bond, Jason Bourne und viele andere Thriller geprägt. Also wollte er auch gerne solche Filme machen, und als er für Kingsman angefragt wurde, war er deswegen total begeistert. Und dann kam Firebird, der Film, der auf einer wahren Geschichte basiert, mit einem beeindruckenden Hintergrund und einer kuriosen Dreier-Beziehungskonstellation. Er hat erkannt, dass das eine Story ist mit Thriller-Anteil, die aber viel realistischer ist und aus der spannenden Perspektive einer Beziehung erzählt wird. Interessant ist an der Stelle, dass Tom nicht nur eine der Hauptrollen spielt, sondern auch Co-Autor des Drehbuchs ist. War es einfacher, in die Rolle zu finden, weil man sich schon so viel mit ihr beschäftigt hat, oder eher schwerer, weil man alles wieder vergessen musste, um den Fokus direkt auf die eine Figur wieder zu setzen?
interestingly, like actually probably the biggest challenge of being a writer and an actor is that I now know that why some directors never allow the writers to come onto the set. Because sometimes I would come onto the set and be like, oh my god, we're shooting it like this. This is so cool. It's exactly how we wrote it. And then sometimes I would come onto the set and I'd be like, we're shooting it like this. So that was a difficult thing actually from the writer's perspective. You know, sometimes, like, I'll give you an example, like in the scene where Roman and Sergei are like reunited after the accident, it's all this amazing blue light. I remember writing this scene and going, I don't know why, but it has to be this kind of bluish purple light where they get reunited in. It just sort of came through me as I was writing. And then when I came to the set and saw it, I was like, wow, this is exactly like how we wrote it. And, you know, the lighting team and the set design team had taken it literally, which is honestly something that was so cool to find. But from an acting preparation perspective, I'm a great believer in if you get really great writing as an actor, most of your job is actually done. If it's very believable sounding dialogue and the sort of circumstances allow a freedom but also a specificity at the time, a lot of it is actually done. And so having written on the film for so many years, literally, like Peter and I were writing together on the film for about 2.5 years, and actually getting to meet the real Sergei in Russia as well. All of this was like my actor's preparation at the same time. And so sometimes I actually would be able to go into a scene and literally kind of let the scene come through me as opposed to having to do too much, which is honestly like a really humbling experience to be so prepared to then kind of allow yourself to just like open up and see what happens.
Die größte Herausforderung daran, Autor und Schauspieler zu sein, liegt darin, dass man manchmal, wenn man das Set sieht, denkt, wow, das ist genau so, wie ich es mir vorgestellt habe. Und dann aber manchmal halt auch, was, so wird das jetzt interpretiert? Für Tom war es zum Glück Ersteres. Er sagt, wenn man eine gut geschriebene Rolle hat, hat man es als Schauspieler leicht. Also war es eher praktisch, auch Autor des Drehbuchs zu sein, weil das Schreiben und die Rollenrecherche zusammenfielen. Doch jetzt mal direkt zum Dreh. Peter, du hast gesagt, wenn du es historisch nicht korrekt drehen kannst, drehst du es nicht. Warum waren keine Kompromisse möglich?
Because it's a true story, and I think we made a commitment to Sergei before he passed away to tell it in the best possible way. And for me, you know, I don't consider myself part of the film industry as such. I really made the story and want to make other stories because I love the story. I think for me that's the foremost, most important bit is that it resonates with me, which I then hope it also will have a meaning for other people. And I think, you know, as an independent production with a limited budget, it was pretty challenging to actually recreate the 1970s and to recreate the Soviet Air Force Base. I mean, fortunately, there are no Soviet Air Force bases left in Estonia, so we could not shoot at the real location. We literally had to build and improvise at 46 different locations. We found last little remaining bits. For example, the airplane hangars are at an old airfield and they are real Soviet bomb-proof, blast-proof doors and everything. So we went in, we like fixed it up, construction crews cleaned it up, painted. The same with the barracks, which we shot in all the barrack scenes, like where the Zvera comes to visit and the joke and etc. It's done in an old Soviet border guards barracks, which were still up. Now, actually, they are demolished. They were demolished a year after our shooting. And there, the funny thing was, when we were shooting the joke scene, Major Zverev, the KGB major played by Malgus, he walks in and stops. And it's like, what's going on? Like, what's wrong? And then Malgus was like, this was the room where I actually slept and spent my 2-year conscription in the Soviet army. So that's how real our locations were at times.
Es ist eine wahre Begebenheit und er hat es dem echten Sergei vor seinem Tod noch versprochen, dass er es so wahrheitsgetreu wie möglich dreht. Dazu liebt er die Geschichte so, wie sie ist, und er hoffte, sie hat auch eine Bedeutung für andere Menschen. Kleine Kompromisse gab es dann aber natürlich trotzdem. Die Originalgeschichte heißt Die Geschichte von Roman. Warum wurde sie in Firebird geändert?
Because everybody started saying that it's Roman in English, which means Roman, which means like, is it about Romans and like ancient times? It was very misleading for the English-speaking audiences, and we felt that that it might be perceived in a let's say different way in an English language. And then we started to really look for the new title and suddenly realized that Firebird is natural, that it's a story about rebirth, about finding yourself, and it's a story, I mean, in the plot line it's also a kind of pivoting moment for Sergei's life and making new decisions in his life, so it kind of felt natural. Since also especially the ending shot at the theater had been in our mind, I think, for the whole 6-7 years of writing it. So it just kind of felt like the natural choice.
I think it's also worth mentioning as well that, like, because we have taken certain liberties as screenwriters, I think if people seek out the original story to go and see it, they will be quite surprised actually at some of the changes. And we felt actually that it was very important to make some significant changes actually in the story to help with it actually sounding believable, placing it in the kind of political and sociological context of the time. And also we significantly changed the character of Louisa actually in the film to actually make the female perspective really heard and really seen, because in the original story she's portrayed as a formidable drunk, and we really didn't actually feel that that was very fair to her actually as a representation of kind of all parties within this love triangle. It's actually a really big wish that both Peter and I have to actually give a voice to all of those perspectives, particularly in same-sex relationships. So often the story will focus on the heroic outcome of the two parties who get together, but what about the trail of destruction which they leave behind, and like all the other broken hearts? So we really wanted to actually have a kind of a dedicated voice for Louisa as well.
Der Name Roman war also der Buchbezeichnung zu ähnlich und hätte zu Verwirrungen führen können. Sie haben nach einem neuen Titel gesucht und Firebird war die natürlichste Wahl, weil der Titel unter anderem Wiedergeburt, Selbstfindung und neue Entscheidungen bedeutet. Nach 7 Jahren Schreiben hat sich das wie der logischste Titel angefühlt. Außerdem gibt es dann doch ein paar kleine Unterschiede zwischen der Buchvorlage und dem Film, die so nochmal verdeutlicht werden. Als Recherchegrundlage hattet ihr also das Buch und ihr habt sogar sehr lange mit dem echten Sergei gesprochen. Habt ihr euch auch mit der aktuellen Situation homosexueller Paare beschäftigt?
We decided to make the film really from the perspective which Sergei wished us to tell it from, which was specifically to make the film about love and not about politics. Now, of course, like, it is going to be received in the current circumstances of the time, because we're living in these kind of current times with things that are going on in Russia and also elsewhere, with certain intolerances towards same-sex love. And that really was one of the kind of main intentions, was to show the love story from a perspective of being very accessible and also to deliver a true story. There has been some scrutiny, or there is a significant scrutiny which happens in some of these countries, which basically say that LGBTQIA people do not exist. And, that's just a little bit delusional. So it's really through showing stories and through the intention that we put behind this story that we hope that it will cause a greater understanding in those countries, but also, to the wider audiences of today anyway, and just go, even with the countries which have the most amount of tolerance, what else can be done in order to cause more and more understanding.
Yeah, I would also like add that Sergei had only one wish when we met him in Moscow, and we interviewed him for days and had like tens of hours of audio recordings from that, and his main wish was that please make it, as Tom said already, please make it about love, not politics. So we really looked at the story from the eyes of a 20-year-old boy from the Russian countryside coming to this, for him at the time, amazing Air Force base. And you also look at a lot of films that portray Soviet Union of the time are usually done in like kind of bluish green color grading, and everybody wears gray costumes. But in reality, life was actually still colorful, and people were doing the best to manage and still enjoyed themselves and dressed up. And if you look, and we actually took a lot of documentary photos from 77, 78 for our production team as references, and it's almost like some people on the streets look more taken care of than nowadays, which is interesting. So I think that's those factors together, we kind of decided that it's important to tell the universal human story for the really biggest impact it would have. That if we start to criticize and look from today's perspective, we would actually limit rather than expand the audience.
Es war der explizite Wunsch auch von Sergei, einen Film über Liebe und nicht über Politik zu machen. Eine kritische Sicht von heute auf die Geschichte von damals würde das Publikum einschränken, anstatt die Möglichkeiten des Films zu sehen. Und falls sich jetzt jemand wundert, warum hier über Russland gesprochen wird, als wenn gerade kein Krieg herrscht, über den Film haben Peter, Tom und ich uns schon Anfang des Jahres unterhalten, als es noch keinen Krieg gab. Dann wurde die Veröffentlichung jedoch verschoben. Auch wenn es ein Film über Liebe und nicht über Politik sein soll. Was wollt ihr denn mit eurem Film erreichen?
Do you know? Answer. I'm just going to think about this one for a moment.
For me, it's very clear to create more empathy in these countries actually that the film talks about, meaning former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe and Central Europe. I think that's, if we can create that, if some people change the way they view the LGBT community, for me that's the biggest really achievement, because at the end of the day, love is love, and there is no need to discriminate anybody or no need to restrict anybody's happiness to live a life and have a family.
Mehr Empathie unter die Menschen bringen, und wenn man etwas für die LGBTQ-Gemeinschaft erreichen kann, wäre das toll. Denn Liebe ist Liebe, und deswegen sollte niemand diskriminiert werden. Und wie geht es jetzt weiter? Tom, willst du zukünftig mehr schreiben oder mehr schauspielern?
That's a really good question. I feel it's very important actually for me to do both. Like, as an actor, I'm very role driven. Like, I really want to make and be in films that can carry such a message like this film. It's been amazing to see and hear reactions from people who have said it is through my performance and it's through this film that the person has felt more courage or more acceptance in themselves, or even something like saying it's kind of like a bit like receiving a big hug and saying like it's okay to be who you are. And I go like, if you can do that through making films, and you can kind of be that representation on screen in sort of all lights and action and a world, then I think that's really a journey which I want to continue to go on. That's also not to say that I wouldn't necessarily shoot a Marvel film, because like at the same time I go that is in its own way, I believe, doing its own kind of a thing, which is giving people hope and belief into powers that are beyond our current perception. Like, I'm fascinated to write further about literally like superhuman potential. And my other interests include things like quantum physics and epigenetics, and kind of like basically the cutting edge really of science right now. And so it's kind of really with that particular perspective that I also want to continue writing films.
Für ihn ist also beides wichtig. Wenn er mit einer Rolle anderen Menschen Mut machen und ihnen vermitteln kann, dass sie die sein dürfen, die sie sind, möchte er diesen Weg gerne gehen. Das heißt aber nicht, dass er nun zum Beispiel Marvel-Filme ausschließen würde. Zudem hat er noch weitere Interessen wie Quantenphysik und Epigenetik und mit dieser besonderen Perspektive möchte er gerne Filme machen. Wir sind gespannt, was wir als nächstes von ihm sehen. Erstmal gibt es jetzt den Film Firebird im Kino und on demand.